Got to start with Crystal Palace, who have been demoted from the Europa League and will now play in the Conference League next season after UEFA determined they've breached their multi-club ownership rules. Let's go straight to our chief correspondent, Kaveh Solhekol, who's been right across this story from the start. Kaveh, very good evening. What are the factors that have made UEFA do this action?
I think it's basically down to one man, and that man is the US businessman John Textor. He owns shares in Lyon. He also owns shares in Crystal Palace. And UEFA's rules say that you can't have two clubs with the same ownership, people who own shares in them, playing in the same competition. Now, there is a deadline. The deadline was March the 1st, so John Textor could have sorted this out by March the 1st. For instance, he could have put his shares in Crystal Palace in a blind trust. If he'd done that, then Crystal Palace would be playing in the Europa League next season. But he didn't do that. And there are two reasons why he didn't do that, why he missed that deadline. One is that nobody at Crystal Palace was expecting them to qualify for the Europa League back in March. Crystal Palace have never won a trophy in their history. They ended up winning the FA Cup by beating Manchester City. That's how they got into the Europa League, but they did miss that March the 1st deadline. And also the other reason is that John Textor feels that he's got absolutely no say in the way Crystal Palace are run. He was speaking yesterday. He said, look, if somebody had told me before March the 1st, you need to sort this out, you need to put your shares in Crystal Palace into a blind trust, of course I would have done it, but I've got no control at Crystal Palace. I make suggestions, but more often than not, the executive chairman, Steve Parish, who really runs the club, just ignores me. What UEFA had to decide is, does John Textor have decisive influence at both Crystal Palace and Lyon? And UEFA have decided that he does. However, what Crystal Palace fans will say is John Textor has no say at Crystal Palace. Yes, he does have shares, but Steve Parish runs the club. They will also say, look at the situation, for instance, at Lyon. He has just resigned as president of Lyon. He's resigned from the board. So does he have a say in the way Lyon are going to be run next season? No, he doesn't. And also his situation at Crystal Palace, he's agreed to sell his shares to Crystal Palace. He's sending them to a businessman who's based here in New York, Woody Johnson, for £180 million. What UEFA have basically decided is that the integrity of the Europa League is going to be damaged next season if both Crystal Palace and Lyon play in it. Why? Do they think somehow John Textor, behind the scenes, even though he's selling his shares in Crystal Palace, even though he's resigned from the board at Lyon, is he going to be fixing games? What's he going to be doing that's going to affect the integrity of the Europa League? This has left a very, very nasty, bitter taste in the mouth of everybody at Crystal Palace and all their supporters. And they're not going to take this lying down. They will take this all the way to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, because they believe that UEFA have treated them abominably. Crystal Palace have qualified for the Europa League. They didn't do it by finishing 6th or 7th or wherever everyone else finishes to qualify for the Europa League. They did it by winning the FA Cup. The FA Cup, which is the oldest cup competition in the world, the first major trophy that they've won. They earned their place. That is why they are going to take this to CAS, and they believe they have a good chance of winning at CAS. Also, speaking to people in football, would UEFA have done this to Real Madrid? Would they have done this to Barcelona? What about all the clubs around Europe, all the big clubs who've broken financial fair play rules, who come to agreements behind closed doors with UEFA, who get a little a slap on the wrist and told, oh, there you go, carry on, you can play in the Champions League, you can play in the Europa League, you can do what you want, you can break as many of our financial rules as you want. It doesn't matter because you're Real Madrid, because you're Barcelona. But Crystal Palace, totally different. Crystal Palace don't have any say at UEFA. They don't have history in European competitions. So UEFA can make an example out of them. UEFA can kick them out of the Europa League and put them in the Conference League instead. Who else have they done this to? They did this last month to Drogheda United. a club from the League of Ireland. They threw them out of the Conference League. Why do they only pick on the small clubs? I'm not saying Crystal Palace are a small club, by the way. I want to make that absolutely clear. Crystal Palace are not a small club. But in comparison to Real Madrid and Barcelona, they don't have the influence and the power that those clubs have at UEFA. So why are they being singled out? As I said, UEFA are asking Crystal Palace to swallow a very, very bitter pill. And I will tell you something for nothing now. They are not going to swallow that pill. They are going to spit that pill out, and they will take this all the way to CAS.
Kaveh, you began this by saying Crystal Palace missed a deadline. Did they break the rules, yes or no?
Look, if you're going to be a lawyer about this, if you're going to stick to the letter of the law, the rules are clear. You need to sort out these ownership issues by March the 1st. I don't know why, but UEFA moved the deadline. It used to be June the 1st, but they decided from this year to move it forward to March the 1st. So yes, Crystal Palace missed that deadline, but I explained to you why they missed that deadline. And we're just talking about a piece of paper that you would have paid thousands of pounds for a lawyer to sign, to say John Textor's stake in Crystal Palace is now in a blind trust. It is controlled by these anonymous people, these directors, these businessmen. He doesn't have a say. This is just a sleight of hand. It's not real. You're just asking. You're asking clubs to officially bend the rules by using lawyers to put their owners' shares into a blind trust. Let's be real. If you want to go down the route of just sticking to the letter of the law, yes, Crystal Palace have broken the rules. They should be out of the Europa League. But if you actually think about why the rules are in place, the rules are in place to stop the integrity of UEFA's competitions being damaged by clubs who are part of the same multi-club ownership group playing in the same competitions. Red Bull, Leipzig, Salzburg. Has there ever been any issue with them playing in the same European competitions? No, because they use lawyers to write all these things, put shares in blind trusts, say we've got different management structures at this club to that club. You look at the big clubs who are part of multi-club ownership rules, who play in the Champions League, who play in the Europa League, who play in the Conference League, and UEFA does nothing about that. Absolutely nothing about that. As long as they play along with UEFA, go along with bending the rules by using lawyers to put shares in blind trusts and prove that they've got different management structures. They are actually clubs who are part of multi-club ownership groups. You will not find a single person in the world of football who would tell you that Crystal Palace are run by John Textor, that John Textor controls anything at Crystal Palace. He said it himself yesterday. I don't know why I'm standing here speaking on his behalf. Listen to what he said yesterday. He said, I'm so fed up about the fact that I've got no control at Crystal Palace, that I've sold all my shares. I don't want anything to do with the club anymore because I don't have a say. Yet UEFA have decided to stick to the letter of the law. And the letter of the law says that this needed to have been sorted out by March the 1st. And unfortunately, it wasn't.
Hey. All right, so Palace are going to appeal. We know that. But what does all this mean for Nottingham Forest?
Well, I think there's a very, very good chance now that Nottingham Forest will be moved up from the Conference League to the Europa League. I think we may have to wait for the decision at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. I think if, of course, Palace win their appeal, they'll stay in the Europa League. I think if they lose their appeal, then Nottingham Forest will take their place. If you look at UEFA's regulations, I think their regulation 4.10, paragraph 405, it says that in this instance, the next best placed team in the relevant football association would take the place of the team who have been removed from the competition. And in that case, that would be Nottingham Forest. I think, of course, potentially very, very good news for Nottingham Forest, because the Europa League is worth much more than the Conference League. I think last season Chelsea won the Conference League. They made 22 million euros. I think if you win the Europa League, Spurs won the Europa League last season, they made almost double that. I think around 42 million euros. But just spare a thought for everybody at Crystal Palace at the moment. The players return to pre-season training on Wednesday. What is this going to mean for Crystal Palace going forward? What does this mean for the future of Eberechi Eze? Clubs like Arsenal interested in him. What about the future of Marc Guéhi? What about the future of Jean-Philippe Peteta? Also, what does it mean for players coming into Palace? How do Palace convince players to sign for them when they can't tell them which competitions for sure they will be playing in next season? This is a very, very messy situation. I think it's going to run and run until we get a definitive decision from the Court of Arbitration for Sport. It needs to be sorted out by the end of August, because that's when we will have the draw for the Europa League in Monaco.